Look, we've talked about the worst ways to have the light snuffed out in both DC and Marvel Comics, but I'm sick of talking about those two all the time. Let's talk about my favorite publisher, Image Comics. The brutality and adult nature of most of Image Comics stuff is sure to make a great list of the top 10 worst ways to die in Image Comics. I'm Adam Andrews, let's get into it. Starting off at number 10 is Glenn. Kicking off this list today with one that hits close to home for most people. In both the TV show and the comic books, the former pizza delivery boy turned zombie fighter and scout, Glenn, was the one person in the group that believed there could be a future for them all, and he was easily one of people's most favorite characters, which unfortunately in this world means that he probably won't be around for too long. The worst part is that you have so much faith in this character and his future in the story. Maggie was pregnant with his child, and they were going to start a family as they wanted to rebuild society. Fortunately, the group leader Rick Grimes and his friends crossed a guy by the name of Negan, who led a group called, ironically, the Saviors. The group unwittingly incurred his wrath by taking out a lot of the Saviors that attacked the group. Since Rick had taken the lives of Negan's men, Negan came back in full force to get his revenge. But lining up the group of survivors, Negan made his choice at random. It was one of the most tense moments in the comic, and when he finally chose Glenn, bashing his head in with Lucille in front of his wife and friends, he not only proved that anyone in this world could die, but he proved that a comic book can make me cry and want to throw up all at the same time. Number 9, Nemesis. Now look, I'm not gonna say that Nemesis is a great comic book. It's disliked by a lot of people because it basically just relies on its shock and brutality factor, but gives a main character that isn't really likable at all and has a pretty lame plot. But it does rely on the brutality, which means yes, there are some horrible ways to pass into the afterlife presented here. Now disclaimer, the original was not published by Image Comics, so I won't be talking about that one. Instead, we will focus on Nemesis Reloaded, which was published by Image Comics. Anyways, in issue 3 of the Image comic, Nemesis tricks his way onto a police boat with a very specific officer on board. This officer was responsible for the arrest of Nemesis' parents. While they probably did deserve to be arrested because they were criminals, they also lost their lives, and for that, Nemesis wants revenge. So, after knocking out the officer, he comes back to find the boat is now sinking. Nemesis explains who he is and why this is happening, and then he waits as the boat sinks, and then is picked up by his henchmen. All the while, the officer sinks to his watery grave. No thank you. I'm good. I don't like that. Number 8, Headbutt. The oldest Viltrumites are usually the most powerful of the bunch. One old-timer Viltrumite goes by the name of Conquest, and he is one grizzled old man, battle-scarred with a cybernetic arm and breath that smells like feet. He arrives on Earth to check on Mark's progress with taking over the planet after the Invincible War, so it's safe to say Mark is not in the best mood. But Conquest does not care, and these two have an absolute slog of a battle over the course of 4 issues of the comic. Conquest takes a few hits, but Mark is no match for this guy in the slightest. In an attempt to help Invincible, his girl, Adam Eve, decides to show up on the battlefield and lend a hand. She was far out of her league, and Conquest punched a hole right through her. Actually, he didn't punch, he went like that. I don't know what to call that. That was a line for Mark though, and it sends him into a frenzy. The two Superman-like beings fly straight at one another, and Mark punches straight through Conquest's cybernetic arm, breaking his own arm in the process. He uses his unbroken hand to clock the old man across the face. He bites a massive chunk out of the guy's shoulder. Adam Eve, out of nowhere, revives herself and lends a helpful blast, and then when Conquest breaks Mark's other hand, Invincible uses his head and headbutts Conquest over and over and over and over and over again until what was once an old grizzled Viltrumite's face is now just ground beef. Number 7, Completely Obliterated. If you haven't heard of Image Comics' new series Vanish, allow me to introduce you. Vanish? Nerds. Now you've met. Vanish follows Oliver Harrison. This chosen one peaked at the age of 14 when he took down the leader of the biggest threat to his universe in a mystical place called the Everkeep. Now, as an adult, this chosen one indulges in every vice he can, living a mediocre, sloppy life. Until a group of heroes show up called the Prestige, who are actually the followers of the threat that Oliver took down as a child. The leader of this group of heroes is called Halcyon, and just like the rest, he isn't what he actually seems. Trying to get to Oliver, Halcyon goes after Oliver's ex-best friend, another magic user by the name of Deacon Dust. But Deacon is loyal and refuses to give in to Halcyon no matter how much pain the hero inflicts on him. After launching a bloody ball of spit in Halcyon's face, Deacon is subsequently obliterated in an explosion of guts, innards, and 2 eyeballs. This is only issue 4, so I for one hope we get to see Deacon again, but after that, I don't think there's much chance. Number 6, bit by a walker. In the world of Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, other people are the most dangerous foe one can encounter. People with selfish motivations and with no kind of law and order to keep them in check will do the absolute worst things, but the whole reason that is the case in this story is because the rest of the world have been turned into a horde of undead. So many characters fall to the undead in these comics, and not a single one of those untimely demises looks like they'd be particularly great. For starters, you're having chunks ripped out of you by a walking corpse. That is terrifying. But in most cases, the walkers don't travel solo, which means that more often than not, you're being completely swarmed and torn apart by an entire herd of the Walking Dead. So that's all bad enough, but what if you get bit but manage to escape? Well, now you have to slowly and agonizingly succumb to the zombie infection, turning you into one of the undead and potentially forcing you to turn on your own friends. That's assuming you or one of your closest friends isn't around to put you out of your misery. There is a reason The Walking Dead caused the collapse of society in this Image Comics series. It's because they're scary. Number 5, Thragg vs. Battle Beast. The incredibly powerful and barbarian-like alien known as Thragg, aka Battle Beast, fights for the good guys or the bad guys, as long as it serves his goal to find his equal and better in combat so that they can bring the end of his life in an honorable battle. Honor is the key part here. During his fight against Thragg, the unfathomably strong leader of the Viltrumites, Thragg recognizes Thragg's strength and the two go at it. Now, the Coalition of Worlds organized the use of Ragnars, which are one of the only species of aliens who have proven strong enough to take down Viltrumites. Battle Beast was told that they would only be released if he failed to take down Thragg, so when they were released at the start of the battle and gave Thragg a massive wound, Battle Beast was actually incredibly peed, and he decided to stop fighting Thragg and instead help him defeat the Ragnars so that they could have a fair fight, which Thragg even remarks was a stupid thing to do. But not only did he take away his own advantage, but he even injured himself across the abdomen in the same way that Thragg had been injured, just so he wouldn't have any unfair advantages. These two absolute monsters fought for days until Thragg got the upper hand and crushed the heart of Thragg after the honorable warrior thanked Thragg for the fight of his life. Literally. Number 4, Duel on the Sun. But since I hate Thragg for taking the life of Battle Beast and for being a Freddie Mercury clone, let's talk about how his life came to a close. In the climactic battle between Mark Grayson, Invincible, and Thragg, who had been one of the primary antagonists through the series, Invincible had taken their fight to the very surface of the sun itself. These guys are so powerful that their fight actually goes on for some time, but once Mark forces the two of them into the sun, things really start to heat up. Pun intended. These two keep up their fight even as they're both burning and melting, breaking bones and taking chunks out of each other. The problem for Thragg is that Mark has allies. Thragg has no one. His only motivation is strength, and in the end, that strength failed him when Mark got help from one of Robot's suits that gave him just a few extra minutes of survival on the sun's surface. The slogfest finally came to an end when Mark took a bite out of Thragg's neck, leaving him to burn to nothingness on the sun while Mark was saved by Alan the alien. Number 3, Head Smushed. Saga is an awesome comic book out of Image Comics, and I just started reading it last week, and it's quickly becoming a favorite. In the comic, there are bounty hunters, mercenary types called freelancers. One of these freelancers goes by the name The Will, and he is hired to bring down the main characters for supposed crimes that they committed. The crime of being in love and making a baby together. But that's not important. The Will takes a trip to a lovely little place called Sextillion. If you didn't infer from the name of this place, it's essentially a whole colony in space that seems to have one purpose: pleasure. Oh, fair warning, this comic is not for kids. I should probably say that. Speaking of that though, The Will gets picked up by a groomer. Basically a guy who is in charge of a handful of women and the one who kind of runs the organization. Well, he introduces the Will to one of the girls that he thinks the Will be interested in. For some very obvious reasons, the Will is not interested in this girl and is actually incredibly angry that this girl is even being used like this. So the Will introduces this groomer's head to the insides of his hands and completely destroys it. Gone in a flash. Good riddance, bye. Number 2, Crucified. I bet you were worried Spawn wasn't gonna make this list, didn't you? I wouldn't do that to you guys, come on. In Spawn number 27, we learn of Philip Cran, who has spent his life studying the occult so that one day he could gain access to heaven. Pretty sure that's not how it works, but hey. Calling himself the Curse, very cool, Philip decided the best thing to do in his heavenly endeavor would be to bring down the Hellspawn Al Simmons. Spawn was an agent of heaven at that point though, and was imbued with mystical energy, which Philip would then siphon off for himself. Because he is clearly no match for Spawn, Philip goes with a complete sneak attack on Simmons, blowing a hole clear through Spawn's chest. Unsurprisingly, Spawn wasn't especially pleased about being ambushed and made holy by this psycho. See what I did there? It was good. So he tracks down the Curse and blasts off his bionic arm. The two engage in a battle that began and ended pretty quickly though. Since Spawn was at full power and the Curse was just a crazy guy in a costume, he didn't last that long at all. Spawn beat the absolute beans out of the Curse and then strung up his almost lifeless body against a wall in an alley to warn off any further enemies. That would have resulted in Philip's passing, but his fate was actually even worse later on. But we're not going to talk about it. Number 1, Paul. Now that was pretty bad, but let's fast forward all the way to Spawn issue number 322. Essentially, there was this vampire named Paul, and he had taken a girl and had been keeping her in his house for years, where he would not only drain her, but do anything he wanted. Now look, Spawn is from hell, but there are some lines you just don't cross. Spawn's anger and rage at this guy seems to make him even more powerful, to the point that none of Paul's attempts to stop the Hellspawn even faze him a little bit, and he quickly incapacitates the vampire using a horrifying amount of bugs, but not before he tells Paul to say Monday. When Paul comes back to, he is chained up and Spawn makes him say Friday. Kinda weird, but that's because it has been 5 days since the vampire last fed. On top of that, Spawn had made some roaches go inside Paul and eat away at anything his body produced to help with his hunger, so this guy is starving. Spawn lets a mouse go free down a skinny little hallway and informs Paul that there is even more blood for him at the end of the hallway, and he can either go down that or stay where he is and be consumed by the roaches. Naturally, Paul chooses the hallway, but you see, Spawn had removed all the spikes from his costume and instead put them on either side of said hallway, so Paul has to basically be torn to pieces as he makes his way through, with the bugs chasing after every drop of Paul's blood that hits the ground. But he doesn't, and when he finally gets through, Spawn is there with Paul's mistreated dogs, who have also not eaten in 5 days. Spawn gives Paul the key to the exit, which is back on the other end of the hallway, so Paul is forced to go back through, pursued by ravenous dogs on one side and blood and flesh consuming insects on the other. Needless to say, Paul doesn't make it through. And that, dear nerds, is the end. It's been a blast. I'm Adam Andrews. Make sure you subscribe here at Top 10 Nerd, and I'll catch you all on the flippy flop. Peace!